I mean, some people are saying June, some people saying July or August. I don't know. I mean, I think at this point it basically is testing, right? Like at this point, there are already some like basic test nets and like full implementations of like everything that needs to happen for the merge. Like there's implementations of the consensus clients. There was implementations of the like what we call execution clients now. So like Geth and Nethermind are the bigger ones. And Peter Salagi, the lead dev of Geth, just like tweeted out a few days ago that like Geth is basically one PR away from being ready for the merge, right? So like PR means pull request. It's just basically a big piece of code that gets kind of suggested to be added to the Geth project, and then it'll actually be added and included at some point fairly soon. But obviously, like there's still quite a bit of testing left to go. The piece that has seen like the least testing and where there's still some finishing touches being done on right now is the like in what we call the initial sync process. So this is like when a node joins the network for the first time, then like how do they basically download the kind of what the existing state, so like what the existing like account balances, contract code, and all of those things are. So that they can then kind of be part of the network and go from there. The 5 buckets that at least like I used to organize what was left to be done, where you had the merge, which was basically proof of stake, the surge, which is increasing the capacity of the chain, basically doing sharding and doing a little bit more stuff before that and some more stuff after that. Then there is the verge, which is Verkle trees, which are basically a technology that makes it easier to validate the chain. So like nodes don't have to kind of be so heavy and require like as big computers as before. Then there's the purge, which is like making the chain kind of lighter and making the code lighter by not requiring like every node in the network to process and store all of the old history. And then there is like the splurge, which is just everything else. If we do all of those and we just do the things that we know that we have to do today, then like Ethereum is in a place where if nothing else is done, even after that, then like we're already in a great place, right? Now, I think if all we manage to do is proof of stake and sharding, then I think we're still in a good place. So there is a sense in which it's like, there's basic things that we can do, and then there's like extras, and then there's like extras, and the more extras we can do, in some ways, the better a protocol Ethereum becomes, and even the simpler a protocol Ethereum becomes. So like there's this trade-off where kind of if we're willing to accept more temporary complexity in the development process, then we might get out like more long-term complexity in the protocol design. But like if those don't get done, then like that's also fine, right? And so like there is value in trying to also kind of solidify as many parts of the protocol as soon as we can, just so that people can feel safe and know like, hey, this is actually how it is going to work for the long term. Like layer 2 scaling, like layer 2s are part of the greater ecosystem of a layer 1, and I think like a layer 1 that is like ecosystems being symbiotic with other ecosystems is, I think, we don't even, I think even saying other ecosystems concedes too much, right? Like I think, the Arbitrum ecosystem is part of the Ethereum ecosystem. The like Starknet ecosystem is part of the Ethereum ecosystem. The Optimism ecosystem is part of the Ethereum ecosystem, and same with the Loopring ecosystem and Polygon, right? But look, I think there's nothing wrong with relying on this kind of like beneficial interaction between kind of like different parts and the whole. And I even think that there's important benefits that can come from it, right? Like for example, the Ethereum Foundation historically is like business development is totally not one of its strengths. And you could argue that like part of it is a genuine desire to maintain neutrality and purity and other kind of important things, but part of it probably also just is like us not having certain kinds of talent. But like for example, Polygon, like they do actually have business development, and they have been pretty successful recently at that, right? And like it's not just them. There's plenty of other layer 2 projects as well. I guess I have two ways of replying to that. Like one is like a little bit more trolly, and the other one is meaningful. I'll start with the trolly one. The trolly one is that this year Ethereum is switching to proof of stake, and proof of stake is better and more secure than proof of work. And so after the merge, Ethereum will actually be the most secure base layer. It's trolly because Bitcoiners are going to just like yell and scream and totally disagree with this, but like it is my belief, and I've like written big long pieces about why in a whole bunch of places. The other and more meaningful answer that I think kind of gets at some interesting differences is that this gets to a post that I wrote a couple of years ago called Base Layers and Functionality Escape Velocity. It's like if you just go to vitalik.ca and you just Control F for escape velocity, you should be able to find it. The core idea basically is that like it's not enough for a base layer to be decentralized. The base layer also needs to have like the ability to build things on top of it without like adding extra centralization in the middle. Imagine if you had a country where that country followed like very kind of like libertarian rules about kind of political morality, right? Very strong property rights. If it's like if you have a piece of property, you can do whatever you want on top of it, but a piece of property is indivisible, and the only like property lots that exist are property lots that are the size of a city, right? So like the only plots of lands that currently exist and like have property rights attached are the size of like 10 by 10 square kilometers, and like you can't split them up. The only thing that you can do is like you can make legal contracts that would get that might would get enforced by a court system, but like even there people might get bankrupt and weird things could happen. So in that kind of world, like it looks like the base layer perfectly respects property rights, right? And it looks like the base layer like does everything that someone who cares about that sort of thing would really want. But because the base layer only like deals with property in these kind of like institutionally large chunks, from the point of view of a person experiencing living inside of this country, they might not actually experience that much freedom, right? And the reason why they might not actually experience that much freedom is because if they want to actually live, they would have to live inside of like basically one of like possibly a few thousand private cities, and those private cities might have like whatever rules that they have. Like, it's possible that all of these cities are actually going to be like fairly crappy and not do a good job of respecting people's rights, right? So kind of like the moral is that like even if your base layer is decentralized, because in this particular case like it doesn't have the enough functionality in this case, which would be like allowing people to like actually own like their own property and not just like basically have relationships with people that own like these incredibly big city-sized chunks of land, like because it doesn't have the functionality. Well, it turns out that like the experienced level of kind of like freedom and sovereignty and whatever you want to call it living in this country is actually not very high, right? So I think with Bitcoin it's kind of similar in that like the Bitcoin base chain does not support the like complicated scripting, right? So like it doesn't support what we call rich statefulness, and because of that, it's not possible to create a rollup on top of Bitcoin, right? The only scaling solution that it can support is the Lightning Network. You can't create a rollup on top of Bitcoin. You can't create a plasma chain on top of Bitcoin. You cannot create complicated smart contracts on top of Bitcoin. So if, like, for example, we want to, like, let's say you take the Ethereum Foundation multisig, right? The way the Ethereum Foundation multisig works is that there are 7 participants and you need 4 out of 7 to move large amounts of money, but any 1 out of 7 can withdraw small amounts of money up to a maximum of a certain amount every day. Doing that requires being able to remember that, like, oh, you already made a transaction and you already made a transaction of this size. That's not something that the Bitcoin scripting like language is really able to like process, right? And so if you want to build that kind of design on top of Bitcoin, you have to build it on top of a system that exists on top of Bitcoin, but then that system actually has to add its own trust assumption, right? So like if you take Liquid, for example, right? Like Liquid is a multisig. Like it basically is a permissioned consortium blockchain, like, but it's run by like permissioned people that the Bitcoin community trusts, and so like it doesn't get lumped into the same category as like what some of the what some of the banks are doing, right?